In the autumn of 1513, a messenger reached the English army in France, carrying a package from the Queen of England. Inside was a torn piece of cloth, stiff and dark with dried blood, a scrap cut from the coat of a dead king. The note with it was in Catherine of Aragon's own hand. She was sending her husband, she wrote, a king's coat for his banners. She had wanted to send the whole body, but, in her words, our Englishmen's hearts would not suffer it. You may know Catherine as the wife Henry VIII threw away. The praying, defeated first queen, the one the story leaves behind. But on the day she sent that coat, she was the most powerful woman in England, ruling the country in her husband's name, and she had just destroyed a Scottish army that he, across the Channel, had not. Before the marriage that ended in a war, there were 15 years when it was the best thing in both their lives. It began with a death that felt, to almost everyone, like a release. On the 21st of April 1509, old King Henry VII died at Richmond. In his last years he had grown grasping and feared, squeezing money out of his subjects through a web of fines and debts and bonds. And when his second son came to the throne as Henry VIII, 17 years old and not yet 18, the country celebrated as though a weight had come off its chest. One courtier wrote that people were as joyful as if they had been let out of prison. Another told a friend that the heavens themselves were laughing. He was tall, he was golden, he was athletic and clever and generous where his father had been narrow. After a cold old miser, England had been handed a young king who looked like the sunrise. And the young king knew exactly how to buy that goodwill. 2 men had run his father's hated money machine. Sir Richard Empson and Edmund Dudley, lawyers, not tax collectors, the senior councillors who had worked the system of bonds and debts that everyone loathed. Within days of taking the throne, the new king had them both arrested and thrown in the Tower. The charge was treason, a story that they had plotted to seize control of the old king as he lay dying. Almost no historian believes it. It was a pretext, and everyone knew it. What Empson and Dudley were really guilty of was being the face of the last reign's greed. They were convicted that year, and more than a year later, in 1510, they were beheaded on Tower Hill. The new reign announced itself by putting the old one's tacksmen on the block. And then Henry did something that surprised every court in Europe. He married his brother's widow. You will remember Catherine from where we left her. Stranded in England for 7 years, a widowed princess, running into debt, betrothed to this same young Henry, and then quietly cast off. 4 years before, as a boy of 13, he had been made by his father to sign a secret document disowning that engagement. Now he was king, and no one could make him do anything. He could have walked away and left her to rot. Instead, within about 7 weeks of his father's death, he married her. The match kept England's old alliance with Spain alive, and his councillors were glad of it. But it was also, by every sign we have, something warmer than politics. Henry wrote to Catherine's father that even if he were still free to choose, out of all the women in the world he would choose Catherine for his wife. He was the one person who had ever chosen her, and he chose her when he no longer had to. They married quietly on the 11th of June 1509 at Greenwich, with only a handful of witnesses in the room. No pageants, no wine in the fountains, none of the 2 weeks of spectacle that had greeted her first wedding to Arthur. The spectacle was saved for a fortnight later. On Midsummer Day, the 24th of June, Henry and Catherine were crowned together at Westminster Abbey, king and queen in a single ceremony, side by side. A new king and his queen crowned together in one ceremony was a rarer and grander thing than a king crowned alone. She was 23. She had waited half her life for this, through her mother's death, her first husband's death, 7 years of poverty and being nobody's first concern. And now she was not a leftover, or a pawn, or a widow in a corner. She was the crowned Queen of England, beside a husband who wanted her there. What followed were the good years, and there is no need to exaggerate them, because they were real. Henry's court became a festival. He was young and magnificent, and he could not sit still. There were tournaments, and he rode in them himself, a genuine athlete taking real risks in the tilt-yard. There were disguisings and masks, music that he wrote with his own hand, hunts that lasted from dawn to dark. And much of the pageantry was staged as a kind of devotion, the king playing the loyal knight and Catherine the lady in whose honour he rode. This is the picture that survives of the young Henry VIII. The Golden Prince, the sportsman, the showman. And for these few years the picture was not a lie. But Catherine was not an ornament on his arm. She was, quite possibly, the better educated of the two. She had been raised at the court of her mother, Isabella of Castile, one of the most learned courts in Europe, and she was fluent in Latin when many kings were not. The great scholar Erasmus admired her mind and dedicated a book to her. She was devout, disciplined, and formidably clever, the kind of queen who could hold her own in an argument with the sharpest men of the age, and did. In these years, Henry trusted her judgment completely. She was his wife, and she was also, in every real sense, his partner, a working member of his government whose advice he actually took. He had not married a decoration. He had married a colleague. And in 1513, that partnership was put to the test, and Catherine passed it more brilliantly than Henry did. The young king wanted glory, and glory in those days meant war with France. So he crossed the Channel with a great army to win his spurs. What he actually won was modest. He took a town or two and beat a force of French cavalry in a skirmish so lopsided the French themselves nicknamed it the Battle of the Spurs, for how fast they rode away. Before he sailed, he had to leave someone to hold England behind him. He left his wife. He made Catherine regent, governess of the realm in his absence, with the authority of the crown in her hands. He went to France for a soldier's reputation. He left the kingdom to the woman. And while Henry was chasing small victories abroad, the real war came to Catherine. The King of Scots, James IV, seized the moment of Henry's absence and invaded the north with a huge army. And Catherine met him. She did not lead troops into battle herself. That was the work of an old soldier, the Earl of Surrey. But it was Catherine who raised the men, armed them, supplied them, and sent them north to meet the Scots. On the 9th of September 1513, at a place called Flodden, the English destroyed the Scottish army almost completely. James IV was killed on the field, the last king of Britain ever to die in battle. It was a greater victory than anything Henry had managed in France, and his wife had delivered it to him. She was pregnant as she wrote to tell him so, and she sealed the letter with that grim, glittering gift, the dead king's blood-stained coat, for his banners. Not long after, she lost the child she was carrying. But in that autumn, the King of England and his Spanish Queen were, by every sign, the strongest pair in Europe. This is the part of the story the histories rush past on their way to the divorce. But it is the part that matters most, because it is what was lost. For these years, Henry and Catherine were a genuine partnership, a clever, devout queen and a brilliant young king, and by every account they loved each other. Everything that came later, the annulment, the broken church, the second queen, was the tearing apart of this. This is the marriage my novel, Divorced Not Dead This Time, is about. It takes the two deaths that end, the larger story, Catherine of Aragon's and Anne Boleyn's, and asks, what if they had lived? Everything I have told you is what the documents say happened. The book is what might have. You will find it linked below. And if you want more of both, the true history and the fiction that grows out of it, subscribe. There is a great deal more of this to come.